Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. We were talking recently about about how important the notion of using technology to shop socially was, and actually, when you think back in history, you realise that mums have been waiting at school gates, talking to each other about what they've bought and what soap powder they use. Guys have been standing in bars, talking to each other about what beers they like, and so on, for many, many, many years. And actually, the rise of the social shopper from a technological perspective is no different than that. It's just that it's much more pervasive, and it embraces many, many, many thousands of people. I think that it's interesting when you look at the EMEA region, for instance, and the rate of technological penetration and maturity and speed, of course, is different. In many countries that you go to. I think it will evolve. I think things like Twitter have really accelerated that evolution because it's so easy to do that from a mobile device. I think it's become more interesting that Facebook is a destination that people visit on mobile, so you're not limited by internet speeds and so on. In the UK at the moment, 51% of every social media interaction is made via a mobile phone. So that's every tweet, every Facebook status update, half of those are made by on a mobile device. So from a social shopper perspective, we can only assume that many millions of those are made in stores and in bars and in restaurants, places where people are actually buying something and interacting with a brand at a moment of purchase, which I think is really interesting. But I think over the next 3 or 4 years, there'll start to be a stabilisation within the EMEA region where the technology starts to catch up. And if you go to places, for instance, I don't know, like Kiev, the broadband technology there is incredibly fast. They've only had the technology there for 5 or 6 years, but the technology they have now is incredibly fast. So I think that will all start to balance out. I think the key driver in this from a sales activation perspective is within Twitter and Facebook is that on a mobile device you also have GPS. So your Twitter account and your Facebook page can know where you are. So we call that geo-social context. So your geo-context is based on your physical location, and your social context is based on the interactions that you have within your Facebook community with the people that follow you on Twitter. If you apply geo-social context to activating brands, it becomes incredibly exciting, because what that means is I can push you a brand that you might want to buy based exactly on where you are, what you're doing, and who you're doing it with at that time. So from an old sales promotional perspective, where a successful sales promotion campaign might look at something like 1% redemption, using geo-social context within Facebook and Twitter, redemption rates are much higher because you're selling the right product to people at the right time, in the right place, with the right people. So definitely the latter. I think it's definitely changing. I think that retailers have had to say, if you can't beat them, join them. If you walk around supermarkets now in so many countries, all you see is people walking around with their mobile phones, using barcode scanning, barcode price comparison apps, and so on and so forth. So there's so much information in the the internet universe that isn't in control of retailers or brands that we can access on our mobile device, that I think the best way for retailers to capitalise on this revolution is very much to be part of it. I was told an interesting story recently about a guy who was stood in a queue at a huge supermarket in London on a Saturday, and he'd filled his trolley with maybe £150 of groceries, and he got to the checkouts to find that only 16 of 38 checkouts were open, and the queues were very long. So he tweeted about that, saying it was ridiculous that he had to wait so long to pay for his shopping. Within an hour, 3 of his followers had tweeted back thanking him for that piece of information and saying that They were grateful for it because they were going to go and use the same supermarket that day, but given the queues were so long, they weren't going to go. Now let's assume that they all would have spent £100 or £150 on their weekly groceries. That one tweet potentially cost that supermarket £600, I don't know, £400 or £500 anyway. But actually then, had they have opened more checkouts, then the guy wouldn't have been able to tweet. So I think that retailers have to understand that people are doing this anyway, and the fact that people are doing it anyway affects their business. So monitoring what people are tweeting about, monitoring social noise about your brand is really, really important, because you can respond to it instantly. Potentially that retailer could have spotted that tweet and made a phone call to that supermarket and had another 10 checkouts open, thereby solving the problem. So you have to, our advice to retailers would be, you have to be part of it and you have to embrace it. We talk in the digital activation industry a lot about tagging. So a tag might be a barcode, a QR code, a logo that your mobile phone recognizes. And they are tags that connect the physical world of a brand, of a product, with the digital world of brand information or utility. So for instance, were a brand on their packaging and point of sale in a store to put a QR code onto their packaging that allowed a shopper to access more information about that product or about the benefits of that product, then that becomes very exciting. So a good example might be if your child has got a fever and dad has to jump in the car and go and buy some children's paracetamol medicine. If there were a QR code on that packaging that then told the parent all about how to care for a child with a fever and go home and open the windows and run a cold bath and to make sure that they didn't get dehydrated, this value-added information or utility or usefulness is a way in which brands can add great value to their customers at point of purchase, and that's something that no one's ever been able to do before. Brands have been able to offer value in terms of discounting and multiples or prizes, but they've never been able to offer value by offering great information and utility, and we are really excited about that as something that we can sell to our clients as a new behaviour within the retail environment. I think that brands who think that they can create a branded social network that we will engage with are wrong. I think that there's an interesting article on the internet and it's called Be Where They Are, or Go Where They Are. Digital society congregate in places with similar people, peers, like-minded people. And of course they will talk about brands, they'll engage with brands, but only on their own terms and in their own environments. So I think that what brands absolutely have to look at things like Facebook and look at how they can go and interact with consumers within their own environment. It's interesting when you look at brands like Coca-Cola, for instance. Coca-Cola have 5 million fans on Facebook. So brands can go and play aggressively in these spaces. I think it's much harder for people in their 30s and 40s to embrace digital in the way that people of the younger demographic do. The reason for that is that, and I encounter it myself, because I was a child and a teenager in a non-digital world, everything that I do digitally I have to choose to do. It's a learned behaviour. It's new to me and I love it and I see the value in it, but it's not innate in me to do it. So if you take a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old, it's just implicit and innate in them to do it because they've never lived in a non-digital world. I think they do it. I think it's really interesting when you look at the age group of parents who have got teenage children, because the teenage children really influence what the parents then subsequently do digitally. It's also interesting in some markets, when you look at an older generation again, in the UK they're called the grey market because of their grey hair. So people that have retired at 55, 60, who have used computers in their working lives, but suddenly have all of this time to discover the web and all of the fantastic things that, that the internet can offer. So they start to Skype call their grandchildren in Australia, or they start to research their family tree or book their holidays and stuff. So I think that generation by generation, there's different value that digital can add to your life. The key issue here is that the new generation, and what we call the digital super generation, will drive the next wave of digital revolution unlike any generation before them. And I think that brands and retailers and agencies like ourselves, we don't know what's going to hit us yet, because I think the world is going to change quite dramatically when these guys mature and become adult shoppers. Okay, it's a great question. Okay, let me just think about the answer. If I was a brand and I had 10,000 euros, I think what I would do with it is I think I would attempt to put a peer-to-peer recommendation tool in the aisle of a supermarket. So for instance, in the pet food aisle, I might put up a plasma screen that asked shoppers which food their pet preferred. And I'd gather that data throughout the day, and then I'd have my screen then tell new shoppers that, I don't know, 81% of the dog owners in this supermarket said that their dog preferred this food and not that food. And I think what's interesting about that is when it's on the internet or in the social media environment, we listen to peer-to-peer recommendation and we allow our peers to do that. But brands never do it. Brands always tell us how they think we should feel about their brand in the retail environment. I think it'd be a really interesting, almost like an interesting experiment for a brand to start asking shoppers much more about what they thought, and in doing so, borrowing from the kind of rules of the internet that peer-to-peer recommendation is important. That's probably what I would do.